I'm here to talk a little bit about one of my absolute favorite topics to dork out on, which is vehicle automation. And before I dive in, I'll just say that this is emphatically a group effort and one in which we have a really great team of researchers at DOE, at the national labs, and in the broader community working on this. So I'll talk through a few things that we've found so far, but I don't at any point want to make it sound like this is just my work or I've been working on this alone. So let's dive in. So the first point I always like to make is that transportation is great. Transportation is really amazing. We actually heard from Jose that we need transportation even for a wind industry, so it turns up everywhere. We might be more familiar with some personal uses, so we can now take planes to get really anywhere in the entire world in a day or two. We can rely on a global freight network to make our goods cheaper. We can use our highway system to see beautiful places all over the US. This is from Big Sur, a place that's particularly meaningful to me. And then transportation supports the modern city. So this is New York City on the bottom, with trains, with transit, with transportation options, such as now we're seeing like around DC, Capital Bike Share, and really giving us a wealth of different ways to get around, move people and things throughout the country. So we really have an extraordinary amount of great transportation service. But then we would be remiss if we pretended that our transportation system doesn't still, in the United States at least, largely revolve around the automobile in the middle of that. And that's a big part of the sort of corollary in the second half of this ... sentence, which is that transportation also creates significant problems. So we know that there's huge safety risks to transportation. About 30,000 people in the United States die every year in road crashes. Congestion is a huge problem nationwide. DC, I think, took the trophy again this year. The last year analyzed for the worst congestion, the most time lost due to congestion. We see over $160 billion of costs lost due to congestion from wasted fuel and time sitting in traffic. There's enormous equity issues raised by transportation, where we provide transportation services that maybe don't give equal access to transportation services for everybody. And then, of course, the issues of pollution and contributing to man-made climate change. Transportation is responsible for about a third of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, as well as quite a few criteria pollutants. Maybe this is an extreme example, but we do see this more broadly system-wide. And then we have a huge number of space issues that we have to work through with transportation. This is maybe a tongue-in-cheek image of a parking space and how many more spots you can take up with bicycles if you use those as a transport method rather than cars. And then on the right, a demonstration of the space occupied by a group of, I believe it's 50 people, and their different transportation modes, whether they're using single-occupant vehicles, bicycles, or buses to get around. So this is just to say that there's a cost side of the ledger as well when we're talking about transportation. So we do have one technology that's been rolled out as maybe the solution to all of society's ills in transportation, and that's vehicle automation. And some people definitely think this is going to be big and impactful, so I'll just read a couple quick quotes. So it'll be an order of magnitude safer than a person. In fact, in the distant future, I think people may outlaw driving cars because it's too dangerous. You can't have a person driving a 2-ton death machine. That's from Elon Musk of Tesla. From Google, a fully self-driving car has the potential to have a huge impact. Mobility should be open to the millions around the world who don't have the privilege of holding a driver's license. So really focusing on the equity impacts and the benefits that automation could provide to people who can't or choose not to drive their own vehicle. And then lastly, from the Department of Transportation, automated vehicle safety technologies signal the next revolution in roadway safety. So this is a part of DOT's release of their first ever automated vehicle policy that I'll talk a little bit more about later, really signaling that the government believes that this is a technology that's set to have very profound impact. So I'm going to focus today almost entirely on the energy impacts. That's not to discount the safety, equity, congestion, all of these other impacts, which I think are going to be profoundly important. But I only have 15 minutes, which is a ludicrously short amount of time to talk even about one set of possible impacts, and that's been my area of research. So that brings us to the central question. Will automated vehicles save energy and reduce emissions, or could they backfire? And before I dive into that, let me talk very briefly about the technology and how we got where we are. So a quick history, it's really emerged almost out of nowhere on the scale of how long these technologies usually take to develop. The modern automated vehicle has its roots in a series of challenges by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, from 2005 to 2007, first in the desert and then in an urban environment where teams of researchers from universities and companies competed to build vehicles that when started, would complete a course without any intervention from a human driver, operating completely unmanned. The first one in 2005, 0 vehicles completed the test, and then 2 years later in an urban environment in 2007, 6 teams completed it, the one shown on the left, and then DARPA declared victory, and the researchers behind those topics went off into the world and largely went and joined the companies that we're now seeing making a huge impact in the automated vehicle world. The next huge landmark that I want to call out was an announcement by Google in 2012 that they had already by that point driven 300,000 miles of automated driving without any incidents at that point since their program started in 2010. They were using at that point modified aftermarket vehicles. They took hybrid vehicles and rigged them up with a bunch of sensors, the LiDAR on top there, a bunch of cameras, and a bunch of computing power on board coupled with cloud access, and were able to operate those vehicles in a wide and growing variety of topics, and they've continued developing that technology and have spun off a company to continue to develop automated vehicles. And then the most recent milestone was a 2016 release of the first ever federal automated vehicle policy that lays out the Department of Transportation's vision for how federal and state policy will interact and how they expect to use their policymaking abilities going forward. So not all these automated vehicles are the same. They operate over a wide range of different levels of automation. I'm aware this is a total eye chart. I start with it because there is a little disclaimer here that says I'm only allowed to use this if it's reproduced as is. So here it is as is. Now we'll zoom in because this is maybe a little bit more useful way to look at it. We can differentiate the levels of automation from 0 all the way up to 5. 0 is what you call no automation. It's actually hard to buy a car now that has no automated vehicle features whatsoever, because level 1 automation, driver assistance, is things like automatic stopping in case of identifying something when you're backing up behind the vehicle, or something as simple as cruise control that can just maintain speed on the highway. That's actually a kind of a vehicle automation system. Then you start to get more into these combined systems. So level 2 is still, you expect the operator of the vehicle, the driver, to be paying full attention, but you would expect multiple systems to be assisting the driver in that case. So this could be combining lane keeping with adaptive cruise control that would keep you at the same speed and in your lane, but you as a driver would still have to have your hands on the wheel and be fully attentive. There's a big jump when you go from blue to green, where now it's the vehicle automation system that's monitoring the driving condition and operating the vehicle. But in level 3 automation, and this is critical, the driver is expected to be able to retake control of operating the vehicle at any time. So you would have to be constantly aware. So Tesla's vehicle, when it drives on highway, is in this mode where it's expecting you as the driver to be able to retake control at any time. That's critical. So when you jump to level 4, high automation, that this is no longer assumed. That now the system is designed under the assumption that the human need be always available to take control. And this is when some of the more exotic effects that we're going to talk about start to take over. And then the last level is level 5, full automation. This is true end-to-end automation where you could actually get in your car, have that vehicle take you to your destination without any sort of input other than asking the vehicle to take you where you want to go. So I mostly want to talk about these just to state that a lot of the effects on energy really only start to show up in these high levels of automation, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on. We do expect these sorts of vehicles will mostly be a little further out. Estimates for when they might become available vary, but we already see, and I'll talk about this in a moment, automakers that are proposing releasing level 4 and level 5 vehicles within the next decade. So this is something that could potentially become an issue pretty soon. We don't know how it'll all play out. There's a ferocious race going on right now where every major automaker is developing automated vehicle features. I haven't talked to a single automaker that says we don't think this is going to be a big deal. I've pulled 6 sort of semi-random ones to try to give a sense of the span. So the top left is, this is the Tesla. Tesla's already have some self-driving features on the highway, and they have plans to release more via software update. So they say they now will sell vehicles that have all the hardware, in their opinion, to provide full self-driving, and it's just a matter of a software update as you go. That's pretty crazy stuff. Ford, shown here, has said they'll release level 4 automation vehicles for sale in 2021. That's a date that's coming up very, very soon. And then Uber, people have probably seen in the news, is already testing self-driving vehicles in several markets with a few well-publicized incidents, but they're already demonstrating these vehicles on the road, and they see this as a critical part of their business model going forward. These, though, on the top are still sort of sedan models. They're automating conventional sorts of vehicles. There are some more exotic designs out there. On the bottom left is a Mercedes concept vehicle they demonstrated at the Consumer Electronics Show, where it's essentially a mobile living room. You can see the front seats can actually rotate back so they don't even face the front of the car anymore, and you could be expected to sort of do whatever you want as your vehicle gets you around. They're quite large, and I don't believe they put out fuel economy numbers, but we wouldn't necessarily expect this to be the most efficient vehicle on the road. Maybe on the other side of the spectrum, this is the new Waymo, which is the spin-off of Google and their self-driving car, their demonstration vehicle that they're operating now in select areas as a test vehicle. They've designed this to not even have a steering wheel and a set of pedals. So the idea is this would be a small vehicle that would come pick you up as part of a service fleet, take you where you want to go, and drop you off again. A very different sort of business model than the Mercedes vehicle. And then I won't talk much about it today, but there's also a ton of freight demonstration options out there, vehicles like this that would show up and deliver you your package straight door to door, maybe getting you towards that Amazon Instant that they're obviously pushing for. I'm not going to focus on those today, but those have enormous potentials to reshape the energy landscape as well. So I mainly want to put these up here to emphasize that there's a huge diversity of expectations among automakers for what sort of a vehicle consumers are going to want and what sort of a business model this is going to serve into. Are they going to be fleets of automated vehicle picking people up, or are they going to be privately owned vehicles much like the mode that we have today? So let's go back to the central question. Will automated vehicles save us energy and reduce emissions, or could they backfire? So the short answer is we don't really know yet. We've looked at it pretty hard, and DOE is working on it. I'll go into a little bit more detail because I know that's kind of unsatisfying. So DOE has recently started to expand its efforts on transportation to go beyond the individual vehicle and actually look at the whole system. So looking at systems effects like urban science, like advanced fueling infrastructure, multimodal interactions, and then on the top right, connectivity and automation, asking questions such as, what are the energy implications of connectivity and automation? And that's what I'll go through today. So what are a few of those effects? We can divide up the possible effects that my colleagues and I have identified by looking into demand and efficiency changes. So on the demand side, we expect that we can have some changes to vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, how much people drive, as well as changes in mobility or access to transportation services. And on the efficiency side, we would expect to be affecting the miles per gallon, the efficiency that a vehicle can operate, as well as changes in operation, the context in which they're operating. And then not shown here, you also might expect automated vehicles to be suitable for electrification if the vehicles know where to go to plug into charge, if they can match the range of the vehicle to the trip that's being required. So I won't go through each of these just for lack of time. The reference down here, and then I'm also happy to talk through any of these with people. I'll just talk about a couple. So on the demand side, you expect travel to get easier, you expect it to get cheaper, and you don't necessarily mind as much the time that you have in a vehicle if you're able to use that time productively. That could be checking your email, that could be watching a movie, that could be taking a nap. We expect that if people don't mind spending time in the vehicle as much, they might travel further or potentially live further from their destinations. You might also shift more miles into vehicles from other modes, such as aircraft or transit potentially. On the plus side, you might reduce the amount of time you spend hunting for parking. People spend an unbelievable amount of time, especially in a city environment, circling around looking for parking spaces, and you might be able to reduce that. You might also be able to enable significant improvements in ride sharing, if that's a seamless experience where you're able to jump in and out of a vehicle without it being too complicated. We're already seeing business models like that starting to emerge. On the efficiency side, you might be able to smooth out your drive cycles. So we know that a human driver who drives sort of smooth acceleration and deceleration is much more efficient. Automated vehicles are very good at that. You might be able to do platooning. So this is where you'd have two vehicles or more on the highway, especially operating very close to each other, closer than it's safe to operate with a human driver, where they're usually connected and then working together very quickly to stay the exact same distance. With that slipstreaming effect, you can improve the mileage. Anybody who's ever ridden a bicycle behind somebody else knows how much easier it feels to do that when somebody is getting the air out of the way for you. And then on the downside, on the efficiency side, you might enable very significantly faster travel safely. That's great from a time-saving perspective, but from an energy perspective, the faster you go, the more energy used. So we as a team have begun to quantify these. In 2014, released a paper trying to quantify the 11 possible effects. We felt there was literature to do so. I won't, again, go through each of these, but I just want to point out that this is a percentage, this is a fractional change. So we're looking at increases of up to 50% from some of these individual effects, and savings very significant on the other side as well. So when you add these up, and this is, I think, the analysis result I'm still the most teased about, we found that the energy savings, the petroleum and emissions reductions, could be as high as 90%. Depending on which effects manifest themselves, or you could end up tripling your energy use in transportation and energy use and emissions from transportation, right? So that's an incredibly broad range. So it's easy to see why people tease me about that a little bit. But I would argue that that's actually an important starting point, to know how wide apart those bookends are. So further analysis by my colleagues has started to break that down where you'd expect to see it. So in conventional vehicles, we might expect a total US fuel use of about 100 billion gallons per year. Partial automation can add some uncertainty to that. You could get some savings from some of these partial automation effects, but it's really when you get into this full automation with and without ride sharing that the full range starts to impress itself upon you. So what this emphasizes for us is that it's really going to depend on how these scenarios evolve. So I want to break this down from a little bit more of a storytelling perspective into a sort of peril and a promise scenario. Since that was in the title of the talk, I felt like I had to go to that somewhere. So you can imagine a peril scenario being something like faster travel and productive use of time supports sprawl. People are willing and happy to live much further from their destinations. Large vehicles with poor fuel economy tend to dominate, and we're talking about individual ownership still dominating, and then lots of empty vehicle miles maybe while it's circling around. So you can imagine maybe my day starts, I have breakfast at home, I live 100 miles from DC to the west in a lovely little place in the hills. I jump in my personally owned mobile living room, take the hour-long ride to work, going very fast on the highway while I'm catching up on my email. I don't mind. I can get all that done before I even get to the office. Then maybe I go out to happy hour after work, but it's $20 an hour to park downtown. So I'll just send my vehicle driving around the block, waiting for me while I'm in there, and it'll come pick me up. And maybe there's no rules against that. And then it takes me back home. And so maybe by the end of the day, my vehicle has put 200 or 300 miles on it, compared to what would normally be a much lower total today. The flip side of that would be the kind of promise scenario where you mostly have shared use. You mostly have city use, match the vehicle to the trip, so you can bring the right size and range of vehicle to whatever trip you need. You can electrify most of those miles, and then you have an urban form that's adapted around automation. So in this scenario, maybe I get up in the morning, grab breakfast at the corner cafe. When I'm ready to go to my first meeting, a little 1 or 2 seater vehicle with 20 miles of electric range picks me up and takes me to my meeting. When I'm done with work, maybe my coworkers and I want to go out for a drink. Maybe 6 of us are going, so a 6-seater pulls up and takes us to where we want to go, so we're able to socialize on the trip. So that's the kind of energy promise scenario. And what I want to emphasize about this is that both of these scenarios are kind of awesome in some ways. Both of these are providing an energy transportation service that you can imagine people being really excited about. So I'm not trying to say one of these is better or worse. The peril and promise is really from an energy perspective, and something that we need to think through in advance as this system evolves. So I would argue that this is going to be more so and more so not a technology question, but a question of how humans respond to these technologies. So I've got a couple of human questions. I'll go through them very quickly since I know we're already over time, and I hope I'm not keeping people from next meetings. You could have a sort of promise scenario of platooning road trains where highways are dominated by vehicles working together to save energy. But on the other side, if you're at the front or the back of one of these, you're not getting those energy saving benefits. So what's to stop me from writing an algorithm that tries to get myself into the middle of those? Well, then you don't have a road train that's going to work very well, right? So the broader question is, will we write selfish algorithms for these vehicles, or will we write cooperative algorithms for these vehicles? I don't think we know the answer to that yet. Will we have urban travel on demand models or this sort of sprawl long commute model? And this is really going to depend on where people want to live in an automated future. People choose where they want to live. That's how we end up dictating our form. So it's really about what sort of future we're looking for. We can have the right size, sort of quote unquote right size, bringing the small vehicle when you need a small trip, a large vehicle for a large trip, versus the self-owned mobile lounges. And here we really are asking, what sort of vehicle do people want? What will people choose based on how much they cost? There's a great promise in these, what we call the marginal pricing of travel. So this is if I don't own a vehicle, I don't have that sunk cost of already having spent the money on the up front. I'm actually just spending the money per trip, and that can change how you perceive travel and the amount that you travel. But if we're going to very cheap travel, as we said, we might expect to see a very significant increase in vehicle miles traveled. So this gets us to questions like, do I want to own a car under these circumstances? Should I travel by car today, or are there other modes? Do I want to travel a different way, or do I not want to travel? And then the last one, which I think really is a good framing for how humans think about these questions. We know we could design an algorithm with an efficient button that would say, I'm going to take you the most efficient route, I'm going to take you the most efficient speed, I'm going to start and stop smoothly. Or we could design an algorithm with a fast button that says, get me there as quickly as possible. Which of those do you think, if you had those, you would press? And then which do we think we as a society will press? And I don't have an answer to any of these questions. These are just, I think, the things that are going to define what the future of energy use looks like. So what's next? This is being worked out right now at the state level. This is a map that Stanford produces of states that have taken on passed or not yet passed legislation relating to self-driving cars. State policy isn't really built for them. We're having to figure this out as we go along. This is being developed in live time. Federal policy is also being worked out at the same time. Cities are having to figure out what this will look like, and companies, as I said, are developing this at a frantic pace. So we don't know the answers to any of these questions yet. What I would argue is that I believe, based on the evidence we've collected so far, that automated vehicles represent one of the essential technologies that we might be able to use to combat human-caused climate change. We shouldn't take it for granted, though. But in closing, we are, I believe, still in the driver's seat, and we have a choice as we go forward. Thank you very much.